There was chaos in the House of Commons on Monday night over a vote on an NDP motion to have Canada officially and unilaterally recognize the state of Palestine. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from the Big Smoke. Brian, talk more about the motion, why it's important, and how it ended.
The motion was important. I mean, there's two different motions. There's the one MPs debated all day, and then the one they voted on, and that's what led to the chaos. So we'll start with the one they debated all day. This was a motion brought forward by the NDP to try and really use a vote in the House of Commons to try and shift Canada's position on Israel dramatically in the direction of Hamas. And I don't speak lightly when I say Hamas. It included having Canada officially recognize the state of Palestine. This would be done in an official capacity. This would be done unilaterally and overturn Canada's decades-long policy of saying there needs to be a negotiated settlement between Israel and the Palestinian people before we get to a two-state solution, but a two-state solution being the ultimate goal. The NDP motion said, nope, we're just going to say there's a state of Palestine and start dealing with them like they're their own country right now. The problem with that, Hal, is, as I said, and the Israeli government said, many Jewish organizations, many MPs in the House of Commons said, this would have rewarded Hamas for their October 7th terrorist attacks. There's a direct line between saying, we're going to do this and why we're doing it. Well, we're doing it because of the war. How did the war start? Because of the October 7th terrorist attacks. It would have been a reward for carrying out brutal murders, rapes, and kidnapping, and that could not go on. It looked at one point like this vote was going to go ahead and that enough Liberal MPs were going to vote for it that it would pass. The Bloc supported it, the Greens and Elizabeth May supported it, the NDP, of course, supported it. In the end, the Trudeau cabinet was able to negotiate a series of amendments, 14 of them, which dramatically changed the motion and took out the part about recognizing the state of Palestine, put back in what our current policy is. And they announced this at 7:13 at night. The vote was supposed to be 7:15 at night. There were all kinds of claims of point of order, point of privilege. This is out of order. You can't change a motion this much and still vote on it. The Speaker of the House, it was Deputy Speaker Chris Detremont, who listened to his officials and said, no, this is an order. There were protests. They had to suspend the sitting at the House of Commons for more than half an hour. Then they came back. There was more debate and passionate speeches from all sides. In the end, they voted on it, and it passed by a wide margin. More than 200 to 118 against it. So it passed with the amendments. I'm not sure that it should have even have been voted on. Hal, in my long time covering the House, which includes covering things like the same-sex marriage debate, the coalition crisis, the 2008-2009 economic meltdown, the Afghan war, I'm not sure I ever saw anything quite as chaotic as this. The only thing that would come close would be the same-sex marriage vote in late 2005. That would be the only thing.
You know, what's interesting as well, Brian, is the fact that I watched some of the posts on X from federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh saying this was a huge victory for he and his party. But considering all of the amendments, it doesn't sound like it's anything near the original motion.
It's nowhere near the original motion, and I guess that is a good thing. Eventually, they got to a point where the Liberals needed to have a major Muslim organization like the National Council of Canadian Muslims say they would live with these amendments. And that's what ended up happening. And once they signed off on it, the NDP and the Liberals agreed to these amendments, brought them to the House of Commons. And as I said, with 2 minutes to go until voting was supposed to start, sprung them on MPs. They didn't even have a copy of the motion in French, which goes against parliamentary rules. And the Bloc stood up and, they were ready to support the original motion. And they said, we can't even vote on this. It's not even in French. That's how disorganized and chaotic it was. And in the end, I still think that because the Trudeau cabinet voted for it, including the Prime Minister, including Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, who, used Hamas talking points on the number of casualties. That'd be like using Putin talking points in discussing the war between Russia and Ukraine. They all voted for it. To me, this says that it is effectively Canadian policy now, and it's taken our policy too close to Hamas.
So, Brian, even though the push to recognize the state of Palestine was withdrawn, you say the Trudeau government treats its democratic allies, which are at war, quite a bit differently. And I'm speaking specifically of Israel and Ukraine. Why is that?
Well, Justin Trudeau's line on Ukraine for the longest time has been Canada will be there with whatever it takes for as long as it takes for Ukraine to win against Russia, the people that invaded them. We say that we stand with Israel, and yet last night Justin Trudeau effectively said to Israel, Canada will stand with Israel until it becomes mildly uncomfortable for the Liberal Party of Canada. Justin Trudeau moved his vote because of pressure from people who either oppose Israel, many people who actually support Hamas in this fight, people who are misguided, people who are backing a terrorist group. All of these things are true. And Trudeau moved our vote based on that. If you want to know the difference, there are about 1.3 million Canadians who claim Ukrainian heritage. That's a sizable voting bloc. And, I know everyone talks about the size of the group across the prairies, especially in Alberta and to a degree Saskatchewan. But there is also a very large voting bloc in the west end of Toronto and Mississauga, where the Liberals have most of the seats. They need to keep those. And so they have been backing Ukraine to the hilt. And they've been playing domestic political politics, claiming that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives back Russia, which is groundless. You want to know why they're not backing Israel, despite that being Canada's decades-long position? Because there are only 335,000 Jewish Canadians in this country, but there are 1.8 million Muslims. And while no religious group, no ethnic group is a monolithic bloc, the Liberals are betting that most of the Muslim voters in Canada wanted to see them back this resolution from the NDP. So they negotiated to get to a point where they felt more comfortable with it. There was still 3 Liberal MPs that voted against it: Anthony Housefather from Montreal, Marco Mendicino from Toronto, and Ben Carr from Winnipeg. All of them have ridings with significant Jewish populations. All of them have been long-standing defenders of Israel. And kudos to them for standing up and doing what I believe is the right thing last night.
Brian, we're bracing for yet another carbon tax increase. The federal levy is set to go up 23% April 1st. It's not an April Fool's Day joke, unfortunately. 7 premiers have spoken out against the increase, including our premier here in Alberta, Danielle Smith. In fact, she even told Prime Minister Justin Trudeau he needs to fire Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. Do you think that would actually happen?
That was a question that I believe it was my son colleague Rick Bell out in Calgary put it to him. And he had a very long answer for Rick, but effectively said, no, look, I have full faith in my environment minister, and maybe other people need to learn to work together better. Kind of a dig at Premier Smith. But Stephen Guilbeault, as we've discussed before, he is a thorn in the side, not just to your premier, but to Quebec's premier, to Ontario's premier, to British Columbia's premier, to the Atlantic premiers, Saskatchewan Scott Moe, of course. He picks fights with everyone needlessly. But it's depressing to say that he is one of the most influential cabinet ministers in Ottawa. He's not one of the most intelligent. He's not one of the most effective, but he is one of the most influential. He's one of the people listened to the most. And so, I've been told that other ministers have made fun of his comment that we don't need any more roads and have taken shots at him behind closed doors. Doesn't matter. The PM is listening to him. And no, Stephen Guilbeault is not going anywhere. Even though before the last cabinet meeting, I'd heard from both Liberals and Conservatives at various levels of governments that Guilbeault was a goner. He was going to be shuffled out of that portfolio, if not cabinet completely. Trudeau not only left him in, he seems to have given him a lot more rope and a lot more area to run and play in.
So is the Trudeau government showing any sign whatsoever that they may back off the carbon tax increase on April the 1st?
No, in fact, they're saying, Hal, if we don't have this increase, you won't get more money back. We need to have this increase so that you can get more money back. Otherwise, you're going to be poorer because you're not paying the tax.
What?
That is their talking point over the last several days, and it's mind-boggling. But let me just bring up on my computer here the numbers from the parliamentary budget officer. There's 2 reports from the PBO. One looks at the carbon tax. on its own. One looks at the carbon tax and all the other effects. And the PBO says if you just look at the carbon tax, then it's revenue neutral for the government and most people get back more than what they pay. I would argue with that because that assumes several assumptions that I don't think are true, including what the average person drives. Average suburban person is not getting back more than they pay. A downtown person like me, absolutely, but not an average suburban person, for example. But when the PBO looked at all the other impacts, lost economic opportunity, higher prices, the GST charged on top of things, a slower growing economy. Well, what they found was that 4 out of 5 economic quintiles, meaning 80% of people actually pay more than they get back. And so in Alberta, the only people that get back more than they pay in total are people in the bottom 20% economically. And they will get back, they'll be better off by a tune of $592 on average, okay? The next quintile, so if you're between 20 and 40, you're going to get back $62, or you're going to be paying $62 more than you get back. Once you get into the middle, you're down $1,400 in Alberta. If you're upper middle class, you're going to be down 4,000. And if you are among the highest income earners, your family's going to be down almost $9,000 a year just in Alberta. Those are staggering numbers, Hal. But that's the full impact of this. And it's not something Justin Trudeau takes into account, and it's not something that he will acknowledge when Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre stands up and asks about this very report.
So, Brian, bottom line, will the government's carbon tax increase, along with increases to the alcohol tax and soon to be enacted travel security tax, push inflation back up?
Absolutely, they will. So the carbon tax is going to go up by 23%. That will increase the cost of a liter of gas by several cents. It will increase the cost of diesel, which will in turn increase the cost of shipping, which will increase the cost of food and anything else that you buy that comes by truck, at least from within this country. So of course that's going to push inflation back up. The alcohol tax is going up by 2%. Was supposed to go up by almost 5. They're celebrating as if they've given everyone a tax cut. They haven't. It's still going up. That will push up either the cost to restaurants or the prices at restaurants. And if restaurants don't feel that they can pass that cost on to you, the consumer, well, then that eats into their bottom line. That eats into their ability to hire more staff. These, they have negative economic impacts. And then on May 1st, as you mentioned, the security surcharge for CATSA goes up by 33%. It's already significantly higher than what they have in the United States or Europe, and we're going to put it up by 33%. You're not going to get 33% better service as people yell at you to take your laptop out of your bag at the airport. You're just going to pay more, and that means that your airline ticket is going to cost more.
The body of former Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney is lying in state in Ottawa, Brian. Now, a state funeral is being planned this weekend in Montreal, and hockey legend Wayne Gretzky is giving the eulogy?
He's one of the people giving the eulogy. He is going to speak. The Gretzky family have long been involved in politics. I'm told that in 1983, when Brian Mulroney won the PC party leadership, that the Gretzky family showed up in force for him. I've interviewed Wayne's uncle several times. He's run for office. He's run for the Conservatives in the past. It is a very much a political family, and due to those ties, there has been a connection between the Mulroney family and the Gretzky family. So, I've talked to a lot of people about this who are shocked. It's not something that shocks me. Wayne Gretzky follows politics very closely, both in Canada and the United States. I've had the pleasure of meeting him and talking with him about these issues, and he's very tuned in to what's going on politically. So not shocked that he's there at all. The other speakers include Brian Mulroney's daughter, Caroline Mulroney, who is a cabinet minister here in the province of Ontario in the Doug Ford government. His former cabinet minister, Jean Charest, is going to speak. And so is Pierre-Carl Pelado, who is our former employer. He was the CEO of Quebecor when they owned both the Toronto Sun and the Sun News Network. And Brian Mulroney sat on the board of Quebecor for many years, was a a bit of a mentor to PKP, as he's called. So those are the four people that are going to speak. Mulrooney's body is lying in state in Ottawa at the House of Commons for today and tomorrow. Then it will be moved to Montreal, where they'll call it Lying in Repose, and that will be at St. Patrick's Catholic Basilica, one of the main churches for the Mulroney family in Montreal. And then the state funeral will be at Notre Dame Basilica, the grand church in Old Montreal that you've seen so many big name funerals at in the past.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.